Hello and welcome to the fourth and final video on the Battle of the Trebia. And just so you're aware, I've done 3 videos prior to this on different aspects of the battle. And in the previous one, I spoke about how the battle had been joined, the initial sort of stalemate situation. One thing I didn't mention, which I should pick up, is I did mention the cavalry superiority in terms of numbers and quality that the Carthaginians had, and that had successfully driven those Roman cavalry forces placed on the 2 wings back. So the flanks were exposed, which is never a good thing. However, that's not really the bad thing that happens to Rome, as you will shortly hear. And Rome, it seems, had been not quite assuming parity, but it had been relatively stable in terms of the infantry battle that was going on there. There wasn't a collapse due to anything the Carthaginians were throwing at them in terms of infantry, but it would be that trap that I mentioned in the previous episode. So now, let's talk about what that trap was and how it worked. The trap itself was formed of 1,000 cavalry and 1,000 infantry, and these had been placed the night before the battle by a watercourse and covered. So the idea was, as you can see from the diagram, the Romans would ford the Trebia, engage with the Carthaginian line, and at that point, or at a later point, they would be given a signal and they could fall upon the rear and flank of the Roman army. That's a nightmare, and I'll come to that in a moment. However, the whole premise of this trap does actually raise a few questions, and I'd like the opportunity to indulge in a bit of speculation. The whole premise of the trap relies on the fact that it's sprung, but it can't be sprung until the following morning, at which point, how do you know that's definitely going to happen? How do you know that Longus is going to leave the Roman camp? It's possible, of course, that Hannibal had done this a number of times, and that Longus hadn't moved his men out to meet him. Perhaps they were still being trained, or they were still resting up and Longus was still waiting for the right time. Alternatively, perhaps there were spies in the Roman camp who were able to give Hannibal the assurances that he's ready to come out. All you need to do is give him a bit of a poke. However, speculation aside, we do know that whatever he did that morning, it got the Romans out of the camp, and that was possibly because they were already ready to come out of the camp. They marched to their position. As I said in the previous video, all the stuff to do with the cold is taking effect. However, the Romans are holding their own in the early part of the battle, even though they have that cavalry disadvantage. But then, of course, the trap is sprung, and that's really it. That's game over. And it's game over for a number of reasons. First of all, you've got the effect of all of a sudden having these fresh troops hitting the sides and hitting the rear. And again, this would have been a mix of cavalry, or presumably a mix of cavalry. You would have had the Numidian cavalry. And what they would have been doing is they would have been getting up close, throwing their javelins and getting out. So these aren't impact cavalry in the sense of fighting a melee battle. They're there to stick a javelin where you least want it and then get out before you can get anywhere near them. And that would have been horribly effective. But you've also got, and this is what I really think is the important part of this, you've also got the psychological element. This was anything, or this was the thing that any soldier, any infantryman dreaded. This was the nightmare. To have a unit turn up where you weren't expecting it and were still on it on your flank or on your rear, because you don't know what's happening next. None of them could have known, perhaps there were more coming. This was just the first lot that were falling upon their flank and rear. And like, as you read with many battles, sort of reports from antiquity, the line starts to fragment because you lose that consistency. Suddenly men aren't looking to fight forward anymore. All they want to do is get away because they realise it's lost. It's game over. That's why you have that 10,000 unit of Romans who've broken through the Carthaginian line, and normally that would be a serious headache for the Carthaginians. But the Romans, that 10,000 Romans, march off to Placenta in ancient Rome, because they realise, looking back, that there's nothing they can do. They're not going to be able to help anyone. It's game over. And the losses are substantial. Polybius, who's our main source for this, doesn't give us numbers, but he does say a few interesting things about the types of troops that suffered the most. So he has that the Celts lost the most, which is great for Hannibal because these can be replenished. It's great for the Celts because the Celts, in a way, are saying how much they're involved in this battle. They've involved themselves with a big battle that's beaten the Romans. He loses fewer of the prized Iberian infantry and the Libyan infantry. And unfortunately, there are the elephants. The elephants seem to have been done in by the cold, which apparently is so severe that it stops Hannibal being able to pursue the Roman army. The losses could have been much greater with all the cavalry that he had if he was able to pursue the fleeing Romans, but obviously he can't. And perhaps in a way, he's realised that there's not much to be gained here. So get the cavalry back, get the men back, get them warm, and then enjoy the fruits of the success. Or rather, use that momentum, which is ultimately what he does.